Summer is inherently meant for simplicity. Days spent relaxing and keeping cool. Maybe going for a drive with the windows down and the wind blowing in your hair. Maybe going for a swim in a nearby creek. Or maybe it's packing up a picnic in order to have supper way up in the mountains. That is the kind of summer that I am hoping for. I am attempting to apply this to my summer reading plans as well. And that means just keeping it simple, having a stack of books at the ready that I can just kind of mood read. And so I've come up with a list of 10 books that cross a wide variety of genres to have as reading options this summer. So I'm hoping this is the summer for Gene Stratton Porter. I have read The Girl of the Limberlost and loved it, and I have for years been meaning to read Freckles, which is also written by Gene Stratton Porter and is a story about a orphan boy who I understand has a physical disability. I think he's only has the use of one arm. He has to go through struggles in the early 1900s. I think he is hired to keep the trees safe in the Limberlost. This is an area of Indiana that Gene Stratton Porter seems to have set most, if not all, of her books, and so I am interested to read Freckles. I'm also reading The Harvester with a friend of mine. We are buddy reading it. That is the story of a man named David Langston who, in his young adult time frame, he has lost both of his parents. He's living on this homestead. He has a dog named Belle who he loves, and he's very into nature. He harvests herbs and different plants that have, like for instance willow, that's salicylic acid that is like aspirin, that's good for a headache, and he collects all of these herbs and then sells them to the local town pharmacies and doctors. Well, in this book, it's a romance. He determines that he is ready to settle down and find a wife, and so I think this is his journey in that. And then thirdly, I also might be buddy reading Magic Garden with my same friend. We'll see. It's a pretty slim novel. I know that Magic Garden is also a romance, and so I'm excited to dive back into the world of Gene Stratton Porter. Another vintage book that I am going to read this summer is The House on the Cliff by D.E. Stevenson. This was written, I believe, in the 1960s, not in the early 1900s like Gene Stratton Porter's books were. But this is D.E. Stevenson's 40th some book that she published. She seems like she was pretty much a machine. It says on the back cover that D.E. Stevenson wrote one book a year. This book is set in Devonshire, which I'm really excited about, to have that English coastal setting. This is the story of a girl who's sort of this bit part actress. She's obviously not making a lot of money being an actress, but it is her career. And she discovers from a local law firm that she has inherited a house on a cliff called Mountain Cross. And rather than sell it, which is what the law firm wants to do, and just give her the proceeds, she decides to go and live there. I also think that this is a romance. I have not ever read any of D.E. Stevenson's books, and so I'm excited to try this and hoping that it feels like a light summer read. Also published in the early 1900s, I have Natsumi Soseki, who wrote Bachin. Bachin is a young man who is a city dweller. I think he's from Tokyo, and he moves out into the Japanese countryside and has really come into contact with very traditional peoples. It's sort of his coming of age. He has gone to this village to be a teacher, and hijinks ensue. And so as he's coming across very traditional, conservative Japanese peoples with specific cultural requirements, he is obviously falling short of that from his experience of living in the city. This is what I understand, a Japanese classic. It is very popular for reading for its poignancy and sort of growing from adolescence into adulthood and sort of cultural humor. And so it's pretty short. It's not a huge read. I also read in some reviews that people said it's a really great light summer story, and so I am hoping to get to that this summer. All right, so I've decided to just go in chronological order of when books were published. So this is the Earthsea Quartet by Ursula Le Guin. I have done some research on this, and there is some belief that the first 3 books are really a trilogy, and then the 4th book, which is part of this quartet, she also wrote a 5th and 6th book, which makes it a second trilogy. And there are people who believe that reading the first 3 books is really satisfying, and then reading the second set as a trilogy is really satisfying, rather than reading this as a quartet. The Earthsea series is a post-Tolkien and Lewis fantasy book, but it is a very foundational, classic fantasy that I think anyone who's sort of interested in diving into the fantasy genre and wants to see what was published before we're in modern fantasy, so it's a lot of world building and magic system creation, but then also a very deep dive into the characters and really feeling like no word is wasted, right? It's not super lyrical or a lot of whimsy, and certainly not a lot of romance. This is really at the core of what fantasy is. The first book was written in the early 1970s, I think in 1971, and that is The Wizard of Earthsea. This really introduces the main character of Ged. Ged is a boy in a town, sort of a nondescript town. When their town is under attack from marauders, this boy manages to create a spell that protects and hides their town from the marauders. And by using this magic, it sort of alerts the magical beings in the area that someone was able to do this spell. And someone comes to town and they name the boy Ged and decide to take him under their wing and be a mentor to help him learn to be a mage. Through this, Ged is really frustrated with kind of the little bits of teaching that he's getting. He kind of pushes the envelope. He's being encouraged by someone that he meets who we're really not sure has good intentions for him. And so his mentor, who's apprenticing him, says, you know what, I don't think I'm going to do this. I'm going to send you to wizarding school. And so Ged goes to wizarding school. He, of course, meets the Ron, who is Vetch. He meets the Draco Malfoy, who I think is Jasper. J.K. Rowling seems to have read The Wizard of Earthsea. And so there's, a friend, there's a foe, and there are challenges. And in this, Ged ends up in this sort of like wizarding duel, and he releases a shadow. And this shadow, his entire existence is meant to hunt Ged. And Ged now needs to kind of figure out what he's going to do because he's unleashed this really dark, negative energy into the world that is now targeting him. And that's the first book. With the next set of 2 books, which I plan to read this summer as like the first trilogy, we do follow Ged. I think there are backstories that get introduced and additional information, but I do think that Ged is the main character throughout this. I'm excited to continue this series and hopefully finish that first trilogy this summer. Hannah Coulter by Wendell Berry is a reread for me. I have chosen Hannah Coulter for our Cozy Reader Book Club choice for the month of June. This book is what I would consider a very quiet novel. There's not huge plot-driven denouement at the end that comes to a climax. This is simply the story of Hannah Coulter. You could honestly read it as a memoir style. It's much of the pain that she goes through. You learn right at the beginning that she is a widow due to war, and then the choices that she makes after that, and then her town and her children and just her life as a woman in that era. Wendell Berry does such a phenomenal job with this. This is one of my favorite books, and I am excited for a reread. One of my favorite genres is historical fiction. I found The Glassblower of Murano by Marina Fiorato. This is set in Venice in the 1600s, but it is a dual POV, and so then we also have the modern times. And so I think what happens is there is a glass blower who is very skilled at his craft, and he decides to share the secrets of his craft with influential people in order to save his family in some manner. And then we move into modern day Venice, where we have another glass blower, and somehow the modern glassblower's life is connected with this glassblower in the 1600s. So I have actually been fortunate enough to be in Venice and actually have seen Murano glass being made. It really is phenomenal. Venice, to me, probably because I went in the summer, is a very hot kind of a setting. And so reading this in the summer, I feel like would be perfect. It just will bring me back to my days of sitting outside of a little cafe and eating a gelato and trying to cool off in the heat of the Venetian sun. Continuing in my chronological publishing order, this book I think I have had on other TBRs. This is The Murder at Malawan Hall by Colleen Cambridge. I actually went down a rabbit trail. This is a pen name. She also publishes under the name Colleen Gleason. Colleen Gleason also has other historical fictions, but really connected to vampires, like having people related to Bram Stoker and Sherlock Holmes kind of working together to hunt vampires. It's just kind of an intriguing theme. But under her Colleen Cambridge pen name, she just does kind of your more standard murder mysteries. And this one is set at Agatha Christie's estate. The main character, the sleuth, is actually Agatha Christie's housekeeper. I think her name is Phyllis. This is set in summer, I think, and so again, I think it's appropriate read for that time period. And I think she has kind of taken the Body in the Library Agatha Christie story and folded it into this Murder at Malawan Hall. I'm excited to read this. I love reading murder mysteries in the summer, just as like a quick weekend read or maybe even a read on vacation. And then last, the most modern book that I have to read this summer is The Sunbringer by Hannah Kaner. I think I've mentioned this before on TBR. I'm really hoping to get to it this summer. This is the second book in the God Killer series, I think is what it's called. The first book is called God Killer. And in that, we follow Kissen, who has a disability, but she is a God killer. There was an event that happened to her in the past that really kind of fits in that chosen one trope that causes her to be the perfect person to be the best God killer. She ends up connecting up with this ragtag crew, one of whom is a young girl who has tied and bonded with a god. Now, Kissen's job would be to kill that god. He's not a very important god. He's the god of white lies. But because of the way that he is bonded with this girl, Kissen realizes that if she kills the god, gets rid of him, as is required in the culture that she is living in, the girl will also die. And so Kissen kind of keeps the secret for this girl, and they start to go to travel because she has heard there is a way to separate the god from the girl. Along the way, she connects up with other people who are influential and connected to influential people. There is corruption within the court of this culture. It's kind of interesting to me because of the manufacturing that is done as examples in the book. It feels kind of steampunk and a little bit modern, but then other parts of it, kind of how the court is structured, how their culture is structured, how it's describing the different stores and towns, also feels kind of medieval. So it kind of has this mixed time period setting feel to it, but it doesn't detract from it. It just makes it a little bit more robust. Additionally, I think that the discussion of the gods and communicating with the gods and seeing how gods communicate with humans, it's also very reminiscent of Greek retellings, and so it's just kind of this big hodgepodge, but works really well, and I'm excited to see how Hannah Kaner closes out this tale. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time.